Welcome, everyone, to Dolls of Our Lives, the Patreon, the show where we're reliving the American Girl series book by book, except here where we're doing kind of whatever we want that we think lives in the world of the show, including your suggestions. I'm Mary.
I'm Allison. We decided to go deep into what I did not know initially was sort of a One Direction memoir. Mm-hmm. We chose to read Kaitlyn Tiffany's Everything I Need, I Get From You, How Fangirls Created the Internet as We Know It. Whoa.
This is a wild ride of a book, and I think I saw this mentioned somewhere, and and I thought it looked interesting because, one, this is a show in many ways that explores like why we love American Girl and like what this does for all of us who are into this. So it seemed like a good time to get into a book that's like looking at fandom, and particularly like fandom among girls and women. And like basically one of the main arguments of this book is like, if you look at fandom and particularly girl fandom, one, they're erased from how people have thought or studied fandom in general for a very long time. And then two, like if you look at them, you can see that it's like they shaped the tone of the internet, ? Like that's a big claim of this book, that if you look at how fans behaved on Tumblr and Twitter and early platforms, you can see the ways that like fans created culture that's now been like weirdly co-opted by these platforms and sold back to us. So it's sort of like a weird cycle, but it's a book about many things. It's like part history, part memoir, part travelogue. I don't even know how to describe it. And she's a big fan of 1D. I'm jumping right to acronyms, Allison, as if I'm in this. And I'll say personally, like I knew of One Direction. They were a little bit after my time. Like I remember going to a sleepover where someone essentially gave a PowerPoint about why we should all care about NSYNC more than Backstreet Boys because one of their members had a clothing line, which meant they were deep, which was a lot. So like that's what I remember being big. I know a couple of their songs, but man, I have been on a ride with this book and subsequently watching a lot of clips and listening to a lot of their music. Like Allison, like what did you make of this book?
I liked this book a lot. I think this book is doing multiple things, as you say. I also we know that sometimes you do a project and other people choose titles for you, or like titles get changed. I don't know that I am convinced that fangirls created the internet as we know it. I also think this book was very interesting on a lot of levels. Kaitlyn Tiffany is an essayist and staff writer at The Atlantic, and I think that comes through. She's interested in sort of like consumerism, technology, fandom, the internet overall. I like this line from her where she says, before most people were using the internet for anything, fans were using it for everything.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is kind of the transition that this book charts. Just when you think you are reading like the world's most sophisticated take on the internet and fandom, she talks about Harry Styles barfing. That's not a criticism. That's just like literally how this book is. This is a book that really is about a specific kind of fandom, which is One Direction's fans on the internet as an exploratory lens for the internet itself. I don't know that always worked for me, but I really, really, really like this book.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a big claim to say that girl fans, and particularly fans of One Direction, invented the internet. I'm sure that's like a marketing kind of thing that probably happened. I think she does do a convincing job, at least to me, of laying out a timeline of how the internet developed, driven by fan culture, generally speaking. So she brings up the fact that even back in the 70s, some early listservs on the internet, when it was still not public, were created by Grateful Dead fans to share information about the band. And that's not largely a female populace. Like women are in that, but it's not something known to be all women. Then you have in the 90s, and I forgot about this, David Bowie invented his own internet platform. So you could have an email address that was like at davidbowie.com. And she kind of makes this great point of like, none of us can even fathom like buying into something, a platform or a domain that's like, you know, Mary Mahoney at justinbieber.com or like something like that, which is sort of incredible. So like how celebrities are like, we're trying to interact or like make a space online. And then we kind of have, I think the strongest claim that she could make is that girl fandom did a particularly strong job in driving and shaping social media behavior and content. So the things that girls created online, on Tumblr, around One Direction, around many other things that became like, slang on the internet, like Stan and all these other things, like, yes, girls on the internet probably were predominant in doing this. Like, she makes the point that girls were early adopters of social media, and particularly Instagram, at a faster rate initially than male users. So that's a fact that she has in her arsenal, and that men didn't catch up till 2015 or about 2015 on Instagram, and that girls have developed kind of a culture that she thinks then gets co-opted by the platforms themselves and sold back to them. Like, for example, she'll note Twitter will say on official like corporate accounts, like, "we have to stan," which is not language that corporations developed. It's a quote from an Eminem song that fans then use, etc. I think where she makes her strongest point, and I think how she understands fandom, I like she defines fandom a couple times in the book, because it's like, yeah, what does it mean to be a fan of something? Like, it got me thinking about, like, what am I a fan of? And she says, at its best, fandom is an inside joke that never ends, which is sort of interesting. And then 2 pages later at the end of the book, she says, fandom is an interruption. It's as simple as enjoying something for no reason, and it's as complicated as growing up. It should be celebrated for what it can provide in individual lives, but it should also be taken seriously for what it can do at scale. So I think that's what the book is about. Like, what can fandom do for us individually? What can it do as a collective? I think that's what this book is about.
I think, to your point, there are times where the internet is collapsed with social media. I very much agree with pretty much every thesis in the book about this notion of a fangirl and a specific way of being an enthusiast of something informing the way that certain parts of the internet work. I don't buy that fangirls created the internet. I think the fact that we can collapse social media with the internet is a function of what fans and fangirls specifically have done. But I don't think that's the whole internet.
Yeah. And I don't even care about that. I think the more compelling point to me that's true is that oftentimes when you have studies of fandom or of fan culture, women are erased from those conversations. Like, there is no Comic-Con for American Girl, or something that's gendered specifically towards women and now non-binary folks. And trans folks who are part of this community. Like, we don't have a Comic-Con. I think that's interesting. Like, the corporate nature of fandom does not really privilege women. And I think that she's kind of reading that back into how it's studied. She cites, but does not directly quote from, a Rob Sheffield book about the Beatles and sort of like what it means to be a Beatles fan. And I thought that was an interesting choice to not include that, but say she draws on it, air quotes. I read that book and I absolutely hated it. I have like a huge hatred of that book, which I can only say on Patreon. I'm afraid to say it publicly. Because the way that, first of all, he has a memoir called Love is a Mixtape that is beautiful. And so I picked up this book and I was like, this is going to be like that. And it wasn't, because his view of the Beatles is so reductive and frankly so male-centered. I was like, you don't even get it. Like, you're perpetuating this view of women being screaming like fans at Shea Stadium who can't make artful contributions to like the criticism of the Beatles or actual influence on the Beatles themselves, like women in their lives. Anyway, so to me, she's like writing that wrong. Like, she's starting what I hope is like many studies of what women as critics have contributed to our understanding of all kinds of things in pop culture. And I think that that's really true. But I think that there is something interesting about like, I think it's interesting that memoir is in this book because so much of being a fan is personal. Like, I think it actually can't be described collectively because the definition of that is so different. Like, your definition of fandom for American Girl, your relationship to it is probably really different from mine.
Yeah, and she gets at the personal in a few different ways. I think the thing that really hooked me into this book, because I was not sold right away, just because I wasn't sure what kind of ride I was being taken on, she makes this hugely important point that I think could be its own standalone book, which is that the early internet was all about being anonymous. It was this kind of toolbox that you could play in. And this is where I think there's an important difference between internet and social media. There's still plenty of places on the internet where you don't want to be known for legal and illegal reasons. And she says the change, and where fangirls play this important role, is there's currency in being known and having a brand. There is currency and there is this transactional value to being known, right? People care how many Instagram followers they have. They care that people know them on the internet. I think something that goes unsaid explicitly, part of why women, I think particularly, and I would also say like queer men, right, and trans people had to push for that, is they needed the safety of being known. We couldn't all be playing this anonymous game because it wasn't safe for everybody. She says fandom is the dominant mode of commerce. I think part of what's going on there with needing to be known as a real person is there was no accountability, right? You look at a documentary like Cannibal Cop, where this guy, he ends up going to court because he was writing extensively in fan forums about the fact that he wanted to eat people. And he was like, it was a joke.
Oh my God. Was it Army Hammer?
No, but he was like, it was a joke. Like, it was all a joke. It's just the internet. It's just the internet. And I think a lot of this book is like, so why do we think that? Why was there a need to make people be known? Because it isn't just the internet. The internet is enough of our life now that when you're participating on social media, you and I had this conversation early on. Are we going to do this podcast as ourselves or as some version of a character where people don't know who we are? And we thought there was value in people knowing that we have real life credentials. But there's a world in which we do this podcast or run a meme account and no one knows who we are.
Right. And certainly a lot of people are doing that now. I think you can kind of see it both ways too. Like, I do think that in fandom, like, it's a really clear example of like when the personal is political, like how you feel about something is often tied to your personal story and sort of like the constraints of your own life. And I think for that reason, anonymity has been useful to queer people who can't be out in their lives. And I can also see why accountability would be useful in kind of demarcating them from, you know, people causing harm anonymously online. And it's interesting that like in the book, I think the way she deals with queerness is really interesting in this book. Like as an avowedly straight person, I think there needs to be more nuance to the conversation around, like she uses narrative tropes or like big moments in 1D fandom as a way of like thinking about fandom generally online. And so a really important element for her is like the Larrys of it all. So like coming into this, one of the few things I knew about One Direction was that there is an online fan theory that Harry Styles and Louis Tomlinson are together, that they're married, that I didn't know about Babygate. Let me say that.
Same. I wasn't aware of that either.
So Babygate is the online conspiracy theory that Louis Tomlinson's girlfriend faked having a baby as a way to throw people off the scent that he was actually with Harry Styles. And if you go to this day on Harry Styles' Wikipedia page to the talk page, so it's like a little button you can press on the top left of the page, you can see debates people have about what should appear on anyone's Wikipedia page. And literally there's always people being like, you need to document that he was in a relationship with Louis Tomlinson. And people were like, this isn't real. Like it can't be proven, which is sort of her point, that there's a part of the fandom called Larrys for whom like proving this conspiracy is true is really important. Right. And then there's another group who says we should not be telling stories or making assumptions about real people's private lives and insisting upon it. And I think you can see a similar thing with the Kaylor conversation in Taylor Swift fandom. And I think what's missing from her conversation about it is she's making it a conversation about misinformation and sort of the danger that you can pose to real people like Harry Styles and Louis Tomlinson by making guesses about their private life. And I think an important example that she brings up is that for years, people were like, Lance Bass is gay. Like we all know Lance Bass is gay. And when he finally came out after the ban ended, he was kind of like, every time someone speculated about my sexuality, it really hurt me because he was still coming to terms with it. And he didn't want to be forced to talk about it before he was ready. And so I really think about that because it's like, this is an actually really complicated topic because as a queer person, like I'm always looking to see more representation in the world. And I would love for like anybody to be queer because it's great and that would be wonderful. And at the same time, it's like the Lance Bass of it all does make sense to me that we should not be speculating about someone, especially if they're not ready to talk about it. But I think that's sort of missing from this conversation, the messiness of that.
It is shockingly late in this book that it is made explicit. A point that I thought was going to come out much sooner, which is the fact that it's homophobic to say that it's an accusation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? Like this notion of
Right.
it being an accusation is itself homophobic, because she says in the book it carries with it the notion that this is something that is bad or deviant about him. Not just that it's a secret or that it's hidden or that it's private, right? Because privacy and secrecy are two very different things. But the fact that this is like labeled as an accusation carries with it these certain assumptions. This book, on a lot of levels, like it presents itself as like, this is about communities. There's some cool history about LiveJournal, about Tumblr, this thing called Dreamwidth that I'd never heard about, but it becomes a history of One Direction fandom.
Yeah.
I think it is multiple things all at the same time. The parts that were most compelling to me were the parts that were about fandom more generally, and this idea of a kind of ecstasy of being a fan.
Yes.
I will say this, I was reading the new etiquette list that came out from The Cut last night, and very high on that list was, do not describe a TikTok to someone, that is boring and rude. And I firmly disagree with that, because I think it's part of our shared lexicon now. And as long as you're not being offensive in the description, this book opens with her trying to describe a thing happening on the internet. And that is really hard to do, because the whole point is like you had to be there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's real. And I've experienced that in my own life, where I was trying to describe like something that's a big event to me in the history of this fandom, like this community, our show, like the day when Harry Styles allegedly spit on Chris Pine. And a lot of us just came to the Discord. Like, we just know we all had to like try to process this together. And I was like, seriously, like what happened here? And people hit me with like a lot of really informative, like there were GIFs, there were memes. We were all laughing. It was great. I learned a lot. I then tried to describe that to my coworker the next day. I was like, the greatest thing happened to me yesterday. I was dying laughing. We were all having so much fun. And I'm describing it to her, and her face was just like totally blank, because it was like trying to describe a joke, even though you're not telling it right. That was the feeling of like, this isn't landing on you. And I think I understand why, because you weren't there. And I think in some ways her skill as a writer is that there are times when I think she does communicate like the specialness, or like, as you say, the ecstasy of being a fan. And the strongest way she does that for me is like individual experience. Like, I wish a lot of this book had been more individual people and their experiences, because they all are so different. Like the girl who makes the shrine to Harry Styles' vomit, or like where he threw up on the highway.
Yes.
I thought that story was really strong, because what it kind of showed was like, this girl did this mainly to make herself laugh. Like, she was like, I think this is funny, to like make a shrine to a place that he threw up when he was hungover. And then what genuinely surprised her was that like the press picked it up as if it was a sincere act of adoration. And other fans were like, we're taking this down. Like, you're invoking, like you're violating his privacy. And it was like, whoa, like she basically was like, this went sideways. Like, this is not what I meant.
She says, you can't control the rumors and myths that swirl around the legitimate events of history, which is like hilarious, as if this is up there with like the JFK assassination.
Of course.
All you can do is preserve what you have. She keeps the photo on her Instagram account and promised she would forever. It was more a joke about my life than his. This is what the woman who did this says. Now it's a joke about mine too. And I think something that's like very distinct about our age cohort, and I know that people listen to this show who are outside of our age cohort, is like really truly growing up with the internet. And we very recently had a discussion about this, thinking about the things you did on the internet when you were much younger that would not be advised, or like hopefully not allowed today. But I think so much about the young people whose lives are hyper exposed on the internet now. And I think that we are going to have this major cultural turn. The first generation of people whose parents were bloggers and vloggers are starting to tell their side of the story and have this tremendous disdain for these kinds of social media cultures.
Right.
I am so prepared in the next 10, 15 years for this rubber band to snap from hyper oversharing almost back to a place of anonymity, or back to a place of more privacy, because I laughed so hard. Someone's Instagram header or something I saw, and it was like, we don't have to share everything. Like, there are inside thoughts.
There are inside thoughts. I think that's beautiful. And I also love that there's like a group of teens in New York right now. They were covered in the New York Times a few weeks ago. And they made a whole club for wellness where they all have flip phones and they're all off social media. And I think that that's kind of to your point. Like, you're seeing Gen Z and beyond turning against what for us was like discovery in real time of how online we could be, how connected we could be to each other. And that was allegedly the dream of Web 2.0, was like content creation and sharing and co-creation and all this stuff. And now it's like, okay, but maybe it's too much, like dial it back. And how do you actually have restraint online? Like, how do you curate a restrained depiction of yourself? Like, how do you get to that process? And I don't know. Like, it blows my mind that parents now have to actually debate, like, when are we going to let our kid have social media? Or like, when are we going to let them have an email address? Yeah, I don't know.
Well, thinking too, like, there's a really great history in here about like the way that Beatlemania was covered, right? And the Beatles being
Yes.
this very specific sort of moment. And I think Elvis could also very much be in this conversation. But this idea that you have this kind of ecstasy, right? And she takes on this cultural critic who says it's without content. It's ecstasy without content. As if that is a problem anyway, right? Like, sometimes things are
ask
just
Marjorie
fun.
Kemp. I mean, sometimes it just feels good.
Or
Who
that's a roller
cares?
coaster, right? Like,
Right.
literally being on a roller coaster is ecstasy without content. It's
Right.
a pure thrill, or a water slide in my case. And I remember years ago, we went to a casino to see an exhibit of photographs of fans of the Beatles. And what stood out to
Yes.
me is looking at those photos from the period, the girls who are screaming at the Beatles with excitement and joy, they look like the girls who screamed at Elizabeth Eckford and the Little Rock Nine, who were trying to integrate public high schools. I think part of what this book does is say, like, there is something that is good about productive fandom, right? Or like joy of loving a music. And we need to take that seriously, and we need to separate it, because like screaming at a person or an event or losing control of yourself is different from an ecstatic losing of yourself at a Harry Styles concert. And we need more of that, and less like, there are men especially who like lose it when their team wins or loses. Like, I don't even know how that works. They're climbing up telephone poles.
Right.
We have a huge bandwidth and tolerance for that generally as a culture, unless they like smash too many cars. But then when girls scream at a band, it's seen as like automatically ridiculous. I agree with her that that's changed. I do think we have far more interest and capacity for that now. Clearly, when you mark like the Beatles to today, like, we do talk about it very differently.
I think we do talk about it differently. I think in large part, not to be too cynical, I think it's because corporations have realized how much they can make money off of taking seriously things like girl fandom. And Harry Styles kind of comes in to that chat big time for also kind of playing into that in real and manufactured ways. I think for me, it's like, to your point, I think what's needed is greater self-awareness of your fandom. Like, and that's respective of gender. Like, I think what a great point she makes throughout the book is she finds individual fans and she kind of gets into conversations with them about, like, she presumes like knowing in some ways why they love one D, excuse me, I almost called them One Generation, 1D, and, you know, but what's interesting is the older fans, like our age and above, they do a really interesting thing of being able to say, you know, when I started this, particularly in the Larry's chapter, when I started this, I sincerely believed everything that was being shown to me on Tumblr about their relationship being real, and I would reblog it without question. And realizing as a slightly older person who was a little bit removed from it, that the reason why she believed it was because the algorithm was only showing her things that were complicit with that theory. So nothing, you know, that would question it or call or make her ask, you know, come to different conclusions. And now she was sort of embarrassed that she so easily believed it and that she was part of it. And is obviously like still a fan, but removed from the Larrys of it all. And I think that was a really instructive point in the book that I would have hit a little harder at, to kind of say, this is a really big moment. Like, you need to be self-aware as a fan and being willing to not just like accept wholesale everything that the person you're a fan of says or does, but really question yourself too, like, what is this doing for me? And that answer is going to change over time. But I love the interviews with older fans are really powerful to me, because there's one woman who has like my favorite quote in the book. It involves a swear, so excuse me. I need to find it. Excuse me in advance. I know you don't like that, but
not a swear word. No, it's okay.
I know you don't like cursing. But it's a 40-year-old woman, and she was like, I just got married, and I was literally going to all these One Direction concerts, and my husband was like legitimately jealous of like Harry Styles. Do you remember this part in the book?
Yes, and she has the yes.
Okay, so then where the hell is it? Okay. She says on page 136, I'm a 33-year-old woman. I just don't give a fuck anymore. She told me, I know there are things I like. I want to talk about them and go have a good time. I'm a millennial and I'm going to die. That is, to me, the best quote in this book, because it's like, she says to her husband, look, I'm doing this to process something. Like in the same way that she recalls being into music, different music, when her mother was sick, when she was in college. Like, sometimes pop culture stuff comes into your life and you're like, you know what? I don't even know what this is about for me, but it's getting me through this moment. Or like, I don't even know. She talks about different ways of coming to fandom, like gradually, and then sort of like the immediate convert. And this woman was basically just like, yeah, I don't really know what this is doing for me, and I don't care, because it's helping me process something. And presumably her husband is willing to like receive that.
There's a line too about this author like going to concerts at different parts of her life. She also basically chronicles how a certain song got her through an abortion, and then like choices that she made, and kind of like wearing certain types of apparel. Where this book goes back and forth for me in a way that I think our listeners would really appreciate. Like, I do think if you like this show, you should read this book, sincerely, is this idea of like what is personal for you in your fandom and what you want to share. There's so many things that I really like, and I have no interest in participating in the fandom with them at all. Right. And I think part of what's going on too is Taylor Swift has done this whole thing to like ramp up the intensity of her fandom with the Easter eggs. And I think that's kind of an outgrowth of stuff with the Larrys, where it's like nothing is at face value. Nothing just means what it means. Everything has something deeper. Where this author is appropriately critical of some of these fans is how viciously they attacked the young woman who said that she was pregnant with one of the band members' babies. And she says, the Larry's constant close reading and refusal to accept anything at face value had curdled into obsessive self-interest and a hard lack of empathy, kind of forgetting that these are real people. And like, you know, when people were speculating about whether Taylor Swift had a miscarriage because of some of her lines, it was like, not everything is an Easter egg.
Yeah, not everything is an Easter egg. And I think that there's something about that too that kind of brings up desire. Like, I think I wrote down something from that part of the book. Hold on. Okay, she quotes someone else who says, far from lusting after their boy band idols, Larry's desire itself. And I think that there's something to that of like a misread of women fans is that their fandom is driven by like lust for the member of the boy band that they like. And a lot of what she draws out is like, it's actually about the women themselves and like what this community or relationship with the band does for them. And I think that's what's sort of like needing more self-awareness. Like if you're feeling the need to cyberbully a stranger who's pregnant with a band member's kid, like that's more about you. And, you know, I think a scary piece of this is like, there is no sort of regulation or like, no piece of our society that would corral any of this and sort of say like, okay, this has gone far enough now. It's like everything comes down to internal policing within the community. So you have like even Larry's who host a podcast about this being like, we think it's gone too far, but like we literally have no idea like how to rein this back. And like you have band members saying explicitly like, this is not true. Like that is my baby. And they're like, that's what they would say. Or like, they're like, of course he doesn't control his own socials. So they're just like throwing us off the scent. And, you know, you can just see how this like goes nuts. But I think like her point is well taken that, yeah, this is really scary when it's literally just One Direction stuff. But like, imagine, you know, how terrifying this is, which we easily can when it's applied to, you know, broader societal things like the outcome of presidential elections.
Well, at the root, right, there is being a fan and there's being a fanatic. And I was following this past weekend, the Grammys occurred, and I was following this saga of this woman who genuinely looks a lot like Taylor Swift, and she alleges that she was invited to the Grammys and that it was rescinded and that she was possibly swindled. Her name is Ashley. And there was all this conversation around her, and someone posted that there was a high probability that Taylor Swift's team like pulled the invite if it ever was real. And someone commented like, don't forget, the person who hurt Selena was the head of her fan club. It was the president of her fan club.
Oh my God.
And they weren't saying that this person was capable or trying to pull out that kind of behavior, but that there are lines on the path to fanaticism, and there are controls now around celebrities. I am not suggesting anything of the kind with that person, but a person who is that much of a lookalike might automatically de facto not be allowed within a vicinity of the creator. It was this really kind of interesting conversation that I think plays into that, and that something I kind of felt was running parallel in this book for me is we know that a lot of the success of white rappers such as Eminem or Black groups such as Wu-Tang came from white suburban men who wanted to buy that content, and that they primarily drove the financial success of those individuals or of those groups. And I think that question of desire and sort of like living a life that you don't have, I did become really interested in this book and thinking about like the primary market of desire though on the internet, I think is not this. Like it's the trafficking of women and it's Black culture. Mm-hmm. Like I think that was kind of something that I got thinking about. This book didn't need to do that. But a lot of the trafficking of Black culture on the internet, like Stan does not come from white culture. Like that is appropriated from Black culture, is my understanding.
Yes.
And a lot of language used by trans people and drag performers gets appropriated and then becomes, quote, like white fangirl culture. Like the way that some fans of Taylor Swift speak is borrowed 2 times over from a culture that started somewhere else, which I'm not saying as like a harsh criticism, but I think that is another layer to this.
Yes, and I can share a link to, there's a really great, there's an online website, and I can't remember the name right now, but they have this great feature where people can submit like a mini syllabus on a topic. So it's sort of like resources to get started if you want to learn about something. And there's a great one on Black meme culture by a Black creator and scholar who basically makes this essential point that there's like a lot of white creators who have completely co-opted Black culture online, even down to sharing memes of Black people like in Black culture as your own speak basically online, or like your own language, is something that white people need to think about and essentially not do. And I think that's a really important point that, you know, even in the conversation about the Larrys, and there's a really interesting chapter on like Black fans of One Direction and their effort to get Harry Styles to acknowledge Black Lives Matter at a concert when initially he wouldn't pick up a Black Lives Matter flag thrown on stage. And it's sort of like, even in this history, it is really, I think she's trying to raise awareness to like the dangers of white fandom, like leading to conspiracy culture online that ends up like harming marginalized communities. I think that's sort of like a subtext. But I think in part of that too, you know, that's a different book, but like so much of online language and culture comes from queer communities, comes from Black communities. And she does talk about the rise of Black Twitter, et cetera, as like a really important milestone in the development of social media culture. But yeah, I mean, I think it's worth repeating that a lot of this doesn't come from white people, and yet it's used freely by white fan cultures online all the time now.
I'd never heard of Black Harry's Matter, but that is covered in this book, as you say. And there's this moment, right, where it's like, it probably was a logistical thing. Like this fan has been building up to this moment for months of handing Harry the Black Lives Matter flag, and he doesn't see it. And he literally steps on it. And it's this heartbreaking moment that leads to this whole ripple effect. I really liked one of her closing paragraphs where she talks about like why we care, right? Like, why do we care? And I'm not Harry Styles. Like, whoa, spoiler.
Wow. What a reveal. Why wait this long into the episode to tell me that?
But I have thought about like things that people have written to us, or things that I've said, and ways that people have, you know, expressed like, if you were to think about this. And there is that knee-jerk defensive reaction of like, well, like, why do you care, right? Why do you care about this? And I like when she says, to hope that Niall Horan cares about my rights is to hope that other men I love do. To expect that Liam Payne understands why there are so many rainbow flags in the crowd is to believe that anyone should. To want Harry Styles to wave a Black Lives Matter flag is to believe that the world is shifting. We don't need to be told that these men are more a reflection of us than we are of them. I thought that was really interesting. It was like, okay, if you have chosen to consume content by a person, you want to better understand what they really think. And when you believe that they have made a mistake, you want to clarify it. You want to better understand. And that's where I think this has some of the most interesting and impressive takes on fandom that are very sophisticated. Like, that person invested a lot in that moment. And then there was kind of this bated breath, like, so what is he going to do now? Like, he's been made aware that he messed up with the flag, which does appear to be an innocent mistake. What is he going to do? And she circles around to say, like, a lot of people are making money off of how much we care.
Yes. Yes. And I think in some ways the villain of this book, or the person who emerges as like not necessarily on the side of their own fans in the long arc of their fandom, is Bruce Springsteen, because a lot of she quotes some interesting books now that I want to go read that are studies of early studies of fandom, focusing on Bruce Springsteen fans. Like there's a book in the 80s around the Born to Run album release and things. And her mom is a huge Bruce Springsteen fan. So they kind of bond over like, what does Bruce do for you? What does One Direction do for me? And like having these interesting conversations. And what's interesting is when she interviews the man who wrote that book, and he quotes Bruce Springsteen in 1984 or whenever, saying, I get really mad when I hear marketing conversations about how we can extract more from my fans monetarily, because ideally what I want the band and I to do, you can't put a price on what I want the band and I to offer. And yet, and it's like, whoa, like what a damning quote, like decades ago, knowing that in the past year, this man signed on to dynamic pricing with Ticketmaster and had ultimately no qualms with the fact that his fans were being asked to pay like literally thousands of dollars to see his show. And this is in the same year that he sold his song rights for hundreds of millions of dollars. So presumably he's not hurting for cash. So it's like, you know, what do you do when the object of your fandom like leans even more into like the capitalist side of things, or like seems to... The biggest sin you can create as a creator is to be totally absent or like not concerned at all about the needs of your fans. And I think that's what I see her talking about, is like, I want to be in conversation with them. I want to feel like they've heard our concerns and are like changing, and not like, I've heard your concerns and I'm doing what I want anyway.
It's hard though, because I also see that like so much of this really does lead to unhinged behavior, right? Like she mentions that Lana Del Rey dated a cop, and this was like a personal crisis for a lot of people. And what I kept coming back to is, you don't know these people. And that's what's really, really hard and really, really challenging about fandom, because on some level, you absolutely think that you do, and you just don't. Lana, I'm sorry, it's like the mesh mask and everything else, you know, you actually don't know these people. And I think all the time, like, of the people I interact with on a daily basis, it's like, I'm the person who dresses poorly and walks to Dollar Tree. That is how most people, like most people who actually interface with me on like a flesh level, like that is my interaction with the world. And then I have this community, which is completely different. I have, you know, we all live these multiple, very different lives. It's always amazing to me when we do book club or we do something and I'm able to put human beings attached to like the Discord handles, because every person on there I know as an avatar, and then I get to see them as a real person. It's jarring, right? It's a very different kind of experience.
It is a very different experience. And I think it kind of, gets at in a bigger way how identity is so fluid, generally speaking. Like who we are in real life versus who we are on this show. Like I might say that they're very similar. Like I don't think I'm performing at all. Like I am this way in real life. And yet, like I just had this experience of somebody I work with, hanging out with them and just said in the course of conversation, you know, most people in my family call me Mimi. So if you want to call me Mimi, that's okay. And this person like you was like, well, I've known you as Mary for so long. I don't know what to do with that. Like that feels awkward. But I remember saying to Anna at a certain point when we were dating, like, I kind of need you to call me Mimi. That's like what people like really close to me and my family call me. And it was weird for her, but now it's like even more weird to hear her call me Mary to someone else because it's like she knows me in this completely different way. So it's just like we all have different relationships to like people in our lives, online and offline. And I think at the end of the day, like if I like this just makes me feel like it would be a nightmare to be famous. That's what I also took away from this book because so many fans are like, you're betraying me, like you're not doing what I wanted you to do. And at the end of the day, like I think Bruce's greed and Ticketmaster's greed is regrettable and was really not a good look on him. And the way he dealt with it was not great. And I also think people in you know, general have the right to make their own decisions for themselves. I do think if you are a public figure, you do have to be mindful that people are going to be looking at your choices. So you have to at least know why you're doing what you're doing. But I think this book is interesting because she kind of flips it and says, like, as fans, we also need to know why we're doing what we're doing. And I thought that was a really interesting piece of this, at the very least.
This book made me think a lot about the Elvis movie, which I enjoyed very much. And part of Elvis's tactics came from witnessing interactions at Black churches and being part of, you know, Black church culture. And there's a lot where she talks about how like fandom, whether it's at a concert or in your home, like on your laptop, she says there's this safe and very private kind of rapture, right, that you experience and kind of having this moment. And I think that word choice, rapture, it really made me think about like this is a kind of faith community, right? Like the way that people come together through like One Direction fandom, or the way that K-pop fans call themselves ARMY, right? Like people who are fans of a very specific kind of thing. And that question, right, of like, what do you actually get from being in this fandom? What kind of support do you get? What kind of pulls people together? And like, who's your leader? And are you proud of that leader?
Yeah.
Like, I have not invested seriously in a band or a musician in many years just because of like my relationship with music. I loved Coldplay. That was the first band I ever really, really cared about. The first time I saw Coldplay live, my friend and I, we were really like apprehensive. I was young, like apprehensive about driving home in the dark in the woods. And I said like, let's go during the encore because we'll be able to get right out of the parking lot, right? And so she was like, yeah, of course, absolutely. Like she was just there to like be my friend. We happened to walk past a part of the stage where they were coming back out for the encore. And Chris Martin happened to be within like 10 feet of me. And completely involuntarily, I screamed. Like I screamed my head off. And I'm not that kind of person, right? Like, you know, if you've been listening to this show for a minute, like I don't scream. I don't yell. It was completely involuntary. I just like screamed. And I don't want to say like a girl, but that's the best way I can think of it. It was a high-pitched scream that I happened to experience because we decided to leave early. And I think like this book was the first thing I've read that kind of caught on to like, why did I do that? Like why this otherwise rational person do that?
I had a similar kind of thought process because I was thinking like, what is something in my life I've ever felt that strongly about or had like involuntary reactions to? And I do think like from the time I was younger, like being a Beatles fan was like sort of embarrassing, but like a through line for me, like a private love, but also Dolly Parton. And I was actually reminiscing of like when I saw Dolly Parton in person and my mom brought me for my 30th birthday to Tanglewood and I got to see Dolly from afar. But like, it was such a beautiful thing where like literally like I saw like straight couples there and the husband was dressed in drag like Dolly and the wife was not. And there was like old people, like kids, my mom and I, like gay people, straight people, like everything in between. It was just such a beautiful like mix of people. And then when Dolly came out, like everyone, it was like I have been to very religious events where everyone around me was having that experience of ecstasy and rapture. And I did not. Like I felt like that anecdote of Emily Dickinson, who allegedly during a revival, the minister says, like, stand up if you want to save your soul. Everyone stands up at Emily Dickinson. Like, that was my experience in organized religion. It just didn't reach me the way it reached everyone around me. And yet being a Dolly Parton, I was like, oh my God, this is what it feels like. This is what everyone else has felt like when I was growing up with something else, even with boy bands, which also didn't reach me. But being there, when she came out, it was like, Allison, I can't even tell you. She was bedazzled. The spotlight made her seem like she was glowing. I was screaming and I was crying at the same time. Totally involuntary. I had no control over my body at all. And literally my mom was like, are you okay? But like my mom felt it too, even as sort of like a tangential fan. And it was just so, so beautiful. And I think like reflecting on that, like reading this book, I was just like, wow, what a beautiful gift it is in my life to have loved something so purely and so much that has been so affirming to me as a person, like, and Dolly has her words, but also like what a liability, or like how betrayed you would feel if something that you love in such a way that makes you feel so vulnerable should not love you in return, and you know, should not like be supportive of like how you identify, or you know, take views that are opposite, you know, what you hold to be true. So it's just like, wow, what a vulnerable identity to like kind of unpack and explore. And I do think like you're right, like she does kind of ask that question, like, why did you scream? And it's beautiful. I don't know. I thought it was really, really interesting. I also didn't know this piece at the end that she kind of throws to offhand, but requires more research from me about K-pop fandom spamming cop cams during Black Lives Matter protests.
Yeah, and I think that K-pop, I think that's probably like its own history, and I only know of that secondhand, or I'll occasionally stumble across it on Twitter because it's very, very popular on Twitter. But I think part of where this book takes us is, when I was growing up, I felt like the internet was described to me as like a kind of third space. Like, it's not real life, it's not fantasy, it's some other thing. And part of what this book is revealing is like people have found the places on the internet to pull the levers of real life, to change the market numbers, to dox a person, to ruin a person's life, to make it much better. And I agree. Like, I feel like I don't know nearly enough about that. But the fact that social media has been such a platform for growth of social movements, but it has also been a place for people to hide and try to take down social movements. That's something I think that is going to be like only better understood in the future. I think there's also so much misinformation, and the person who owns Twitter right now has no investment in us understanding how it works.
Not at all. And I think that the digital age, so to speak, like something that still is being negotiated is like in the 20th century and certainly the 19th, like I think nationality was like the biggest collective identity, or like imagined community, you might say, of how people understood themselves as part of a group. And that's a very nebulous term. Like if you consider yourself part of Red Sox Nation or Duncan Nation, like, you know, we're all part of Duncan Nation, if you will, but like there's no geographic requirement for that. Like the only requirement is that you love Dunkin' Donuts. I'm still using your traditional name. I don't care. But now it's like the internet has opened up this space that cuts across so many of these things. And you can identify with a group who maybe their sole, you know, common trait is they at least start with like, let's say we love Joe Rogan's podcast. And then things escalate from there. And the things they might take on as a group activity might be to perpetuate like hate speech or God knows what else. And that's terrifying. Like as uplifting as this is about 1D and the K-pop groups and what they were capable of, I think her ending point is like, but on the flip side, this could also be terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, the people who listen to this show get together and make things and support causes and attend virtual talks. And I also think, you know, to your point earlier, the fandom is the mirror of the creator, but the fandom also has to take accountability for like choices they make, right?
Right.
And that's actually not been explored with very much depth. This book is funny. This book is kind of strange in a lot of ways. My relationship to One Direction is hyper specific, which is they had a video where they pretended to be astronauts and it was for Drag Me Down. First of all, gravity, still just a theory. We'll talk about that some other time.
Wow. Okay.
I loved them in the astronaut suits. I just found that very funny. Like it was so self-serious and absurd. I watched that video on repeat, sometimes for days on end while I was finishing my dissertation, and I would just listen to it over and over and over again. And you think about like people in the past who would literally eat the Bible or memorize the Bible or just say like, I cannot get enough. I cannot consume this content enough.
Right.
That was me with 1D for like 2 months. And then I don't even have any of their music. But
we all have those moments. Like this past year, that was me with Harry's House, where inexplicably I was like, I'm listening to this album every day on a loop. It's bringing me joy. Did he deserve Album of the Year? Absolutely not. And for this man to get on stage and say, this never happens to people like me. Sir, you're a straight white man, by all accounts. This happens to you literally all the time. That's what that is. That category exists to reward people who look like you. Enough. Yeah. And Beyonce's in the room. I'm sorry. But when Beyonce lost to Adele, I'm sorry, I'm getting really heated right now. When Beyonce lost to Adele, let me just like, I'm trying to self-regulate. I'm trying to calm myself down. When Beyonce lost to Adele had the self-possession to get on that stage and look directly at Beyonce and say, we both know you should have won. Publicly owned it. She probably should have handed that trophy over. However, she was like, look, I respect you enough to be like, Lemonade was a moment in time in history, and you should have won this award. But even fans were like, okay, well, Adele's not, like, if it had to go to somebody else, like, we can all agree, Adele, etc. Harry Styles sang off pitch last night on the Grammys. Okay. I'm watching this all play out from my bathtub, by the way. Like, I don't even know what planet I was on, but I was like angry. I'm alone. And I'm like, maybe he looked exhausted. I think he needs a long break. Like, maybe we should be worried, darling. But then he gets on stage and he's like, yeah, this doesn't happen for people like me. And I'm like, dude, where's the self-possession I'm talking about? Like, and you're saying that in front of Beyonce? I would have gotten on that stage and been like, Beyonce, I hope this doesn't offend you that I held this trophy for like literally 30 seconds, but like, please come up here. We both know what's going on. Like,
I've never recovered from someone pointing out that the open line of a song with watermelon in the title tastes like strawberries. Because watermelon and strawberries.
Listen, Allison, here's what I want to say.
About. I know it's adult.
I know. I'm not going there. I'm not going to force you to go there because I know it would upset you. But
no, I know what Sushi Restaurant is about as well. TikTok had to tell me, but I know that they're about adult
It's
themes.
Completely fine. And cinema, like his songs do not reward reading the lyrics in isolation. No, this is not a man who is deep. These are not words I'll be passing along to my children. Like this was the poetry of my age, little girl, little boy, like that will never happen. But he does something for me and I can own that. But it's like, this man to write the words "we pop when we get intimate" or "I pop when we," it's like, sir, comparing sex to popcorn, like, what are we doing? Like, when you're a fan, there's a certain level of embarrassment about his songwriting. So the fact that he gets rewarded with Album of the Year is like, I don't have words for that. Like, certainly, like as Trevor Noah said, like Beyonce's Renaissance was better than perhaps some things produced in the actual Renaissance. Like, that's open for debate, but I think we can certainly agree it was better than Harry's House. And I say this as a fan. That's why I was like, dude, and the fact that he couldn't even acknowledge that, like,
what is one thing you're a fan of that you are actually embarrassed of? Like, you're like, that's actually embarrassing.
Oh, wow. There's probably a lot of things like that.
It's hard because I think embarrassment is so personal. And I'm trying to think what I get a little bit like flummoxed over. And I was on a different podcast last week and we were talking about like, so what do you listen to? And I was like, honestly, I listen to like very extensive, long documentary, investigative true crime podcasts. And some of them are embarrassing to me. And maybe that's horrible to say. Like I'm still active in a Facebook group where people have actually gotten folks who are innocent out of prison. But like the depth to which I am involved, I find embarrassing.
I mean, I think it kind of, that reminds me of like that Shin song, Caring is Creepy. It's like, I don't think caring is creepy. I'm by definition an earnest kind of person when I wish I wasn't. So I don't feel embarrassed of things I love because I'm just like, I did feel embarrassment one time when I'm a huge Paul McCartney fan. And I was a Beatles fan originally because a boy gave me a mixed cassette tape. This is how old I am, when I was 8 years old on the school bus. And I literally went home and was like, there's this new band called the Beatles. And they have this song called I Want to Hold Your Hand. And it's the best song I've ever heard. And like, they're going to be huge. And my parents like laughed at me and were like, yeah, no kidding. And I literally listened to their music in order and I just loved them. And it ended up being, I think for me, like I wanted to be like them, like someone who was creative and could make their own work and whatever. But I've endured like loving Paul McCartney and George and the Beatles. And I've come to realize like John was a trash human being. And like that's another conversation. But I went with some other friends, also women, to see Paul McCartney at Fenway Park. Keep in mind, this is a month after I see Dolly Parton. Like that summer, I was like, I can't believe I'm like living out loud. I see Paul, and first of all, he comes on stage and he played a song which is truly embarrassing called Temporary Secretary. And then he lets us all know, like, I invented dance music. Like, he was kind of Harry Styles last night at the Grammys. And literally all of us just, like, full body cringed in embarrassment, where it's almost like an older relative says something so embarrassing. And you're like, that is deeply not true. And also, stop trying to be someone else and just be yourself. That's it. Like, I was embarrassed on his behalf and also a little bit embarrassed to, like, be taking that on. But yeah, being his fan isn't always easy because he's had like weird insecure moments and done some weird stuff. But ultimately, I like his positivity and I'll defend that. But I mean, I guess I'm not as embarrassed as a fan as I should be, maybe. I don't know. People can let me know who know me. Like, what should I be embarrassed about at this stage of life?
I mean, I go see psychics on the regular and I go to like big shows. And I feel like other people find that embarrassing for me, but I am not embarrassed.
Okay.
Like I don't find that
be embarrassed
embarrassing.
by that.
Like I saw one a few weeks ago and it's like, I'm not embarrassed, but I think other people were.
Did any of that stuff happen? Like, did anything they predict come true?
So I like to go to a big show. This was at a big theater in Worcester. So it was like hundreds and hundreds of seats. And I had the absolute worst seat in the house trying to be COVID conscious and no one was around me. They were like, you're literally in the last row by yourself. And I was like, yes, I chose it
by choice
on the website.
Yes.
And I think some people were embarrassed to be there because I think at the root of that embarrassment is hope. And it's hope that something will happen to you, but also the embarrassment of actually getting picked. I have been tangentially involved in dance things related to my job in the past year. And the greatest like fear of embarrassment was like several times they would talk about how like dance is liberating and everyone should participate. That's a huge fear of embarrassment for me. Like that's a cloudy vibe for me. Like, I'm not going to be good. But no, like not a ton of other things that I find like, I don't know. I feel like it's so different now to embrace the things that you like. Like I have friends who love Dungeons and Dragons and it's like, I don't think that's embarrassing.
No, and I think like in thinking about this, I think a defining piece of my personality is that like from childhood, I've always just liked what I liked and I didn't really care what anybody thought. And I've always had sort of eccentric interests or hobbies, like, you know, not a lot of third graders like listening to a Rosemary Clooney cassette tape, but like, you know, and I really loved disco and I was like 4th and 5th grade and that was just like not in as it is now. But I really thought that was cool. Like liking things that was different has always seemed cool to me. So I don't know. I'm not like super embarrassed. I would say I've only been embarrassed of like how many boxes of cereal I own at one time because that is like my main food group before I started living with Anna, who's a healthier person. So that's not a hobby or a fandom. I mean, I do love cereal, but you know, that's the only thing that comes to mind. But if anything, it's like we must embrace the things that we love, but I think also come to a place of self-awareness about why we love what we love. And the answer may change. But, you know, it can hopefully inform us about why we make certain choices and, you know, keep us on the level, so to speak.
Yeah, speaking of choices, we are taking a very different route next month, and we are doing a much requested book that will take us somewhere completely different, which is Early Sunday Morning, a Pearl Harbor Diary by Barry Denenberg. So needless to say, we are taking a bit of a U-turn. This will be to accompany our episodes on Nenea Mitchell. But Dear America is among our most requested children's book, and we try to balance, you know, forward-looking contemporary with children's books and historical. And April is Judy Blume month, so that will be a whole other thing altogether. But
I'm very excited for where this is going. I'm at war with myself about whether or not I'm going to force myself to rewatch Pearl Harbor starring Ben Affleck when we hit those books.
I choose joy when it comes to Ben Affleck, and I choose now. I'm upset at the footage of him and J-Lo because I think that marriage is not going well, and that bothers me. Of the Grammys last night, I am choosing to believe that he perpetually lives in his mind in the joyful moment of working the Medford Dunkin' Donuts. That is what I choose to believe.
Yes.
Someone commented on TikTok and it caught an essential truth. It was like, this man is married to one of the most beautiful women in pop history. They are both millionaires many times over. And he never looked happier than handing a donut out of a dirty drive-through window in Medford, Massachusetts. And there's a truth there. I think he's probably a little embarrassed of how much he wants to work at Dunkin' Donuts. J-Lo was certainly embarrassed.
I mean, I think she was embarrassed, but she doesn't get it. She's not part of Dunkin' Nation. That's okay. That's
no,
okay.
She's a Starbucks girly. So Pearl Harbor next, and then we'll be talking about Judy Blume, and I think that will be wonderful.
Yeah, very exciting. And this will hopefully come out soon. So hopefully we will be having a PowerPoint party on fandom dramas with presentations from some of you. I'm very excited about this. So feel free to join us for that. We'll be sharing information about the scheduling of that and how to attend very soon.
Cool. And if people want to follow you, where should they do that?
Please write to me about your own fandom drama and your own hot takes on this book and anything else at Mimi Mahoney on Instagram. And Allison, if people want to reach out to you.
I'm at Allison Horrocks on Twitter and Instagram, and I had a horrifically embarrassing handle on Tumblr, but I think I am now completely gone from that website.
Wow. So. Okay. I mean, I don't know that. I think I was on Tumblr, but I must have missed a lot of the stuff that was in this book because I wasn't in as deep. I don't even remember my handle there. I know on AIM Buddy List, mine was Mini Memes 04 because that was my high school graduation year. And Austin Powers was big at that time. And on the softball team, they called me me. So that's that. I guess it's embarrassing. I don't know. It's of a place and a time.
I'm on LiveJournal still. Not active, but I exist.
Wow.
So
that's
I'll
a flex.
leave it there.
I respect that. Wow. Well, thank you to all of you who continue to listen and are part of our fan community here. Like, it does bring joy to our lives. And hopefully we're not involved in any conspiracy plots. And we will see you on our next episode.